Director of Total Wellbeing at Exude. Exude is a consulting firm that focuses on all things people. We specialize in employee benefits, human capital, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and training and development. This past year has highlighted the need and urgency to support our clients in two initiatives that are integrated, DE&I and employee mental health. We feel honored and grateful to be involved in doing such meaningful work. You can visit exudeinc.com for more information about our mission and services. We'd love to connect with you and partner on creating inclusive workplaces where everyone can thrive.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back from lunch. We hope you enjoyed your break and also had time to network with your attendees and partners. I'm Maria Downs, VP of the Symposium Programming Team. Our goal is to make our sessions as interactive as possible. We encourage you to use the chat and Q&A feature throughout the session. Before we get started, we'll hear a message from our sponsor, Exude.
Hello, I'm Carla Chin from Exude. Exude is a consulting firm that focuses on all things people. We are thrilled to be sponsoring the session, The Opt-in. It is my pleasure to introduce our speakers, Aurora Archer, founder and CEO of The Opt-in and Bellatrix Group, and Kelly Croce Sorg, founder of The Opt-in.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, I'm Aurora.
And I'm Kelly.
And we are so delighted to be here. Welcome, Philly SHRM friends. Thank you for having us. A huge shout out to Maria and Jamil for inviting us to be here with all of you. And before we get started, to sort of come into the space with you and sort of have and be in presence with you, if this is comfortable for you, we'd love to invite you to take 3 of the deepest breaths that you've taken yet today. Thank you. And as our sponsor shared, you had 3 choices this afternoon to join 3 different sessions. And we're just curious. Let us know in the chat what prompted you to join us at the opt-in for this session. So take a few seconds and just pop anything that comes to mind in the chat room as I tell you how we're going to spend our time together. We're going to first start by Kelly and I walking you through our stories. And we're going to share those stories from the perspective of our social identities, because we believe that they hold power. And we believe that that power sits at the crux of our transformation, not only as individuals, but the transformation and change that we hope to see in our world. As I shared, my name is Aurora Archer, and I'm an Afro-Latina. My pronouns are she, her, and ella, and I am the product of Hugh S. Archer Jr. That's my papa sitting right there. I'm sitting on his lap. And on the right is my mother, Patricia Gomez, a Mexican immigrant housekeeper. I had the incredible opportunity to grow up in between worlds. I spent my summers in Monterrey, Mexico, hanging out with my abuelita in her kitchen and 32 plus cousins. And I was in Mexico in Monterrey because as domestics, my parents actually couldn't afford summer childcare. I spent my summers with my granny, eating collard greens and black-eyed peas and making up dance routines with my cousins to the latest R&B hits. And then I spent my time after school helping my parents look after the homes and chores of extremely white families in the suburbs of San Antonio, Texas. The complexity and the richness of my younger years and my experience made me pretty clear about my identity. my identity as a female, una chica, my identity as a Mexican with indigenous roots, my identity as a Black woman. It also gave me clarity about the skills and that created identities of being adaptable, of being determined, about having resilience. And I took all of those identities to really map out what became my goal was to scale the corporate ladder, to transcend the identity, my identity of socioeconomic standards and living. And when I chose to excel that corporate ladder, I excelled. I was pretty good. Actually, I would say I was really good at marketing strategy, at leading global launch teams to the tune of billion-dollar profits and revenue for organizations. I led innovation centers across the world. And I specifically did that by a couple of things that I valued. I valued collaboration, which means I always leveraged a team to deliver not only incredible top line revenue goals, but also bottom line profit accountability. I valued people. And so I was actually really good at spotting and building and inspiring diverse teams. I always found it interesting how my teams actually never quite looked as homogeneous as the rest of my peers in corporate America. I also valued curiosity, and I'm really grateful that I grew up in the tech industry where nothing was written in stone back then. And so I was really comfortable with change. Technology was disrupting our customer experience and the way that we were going to market. No problem. I got you. Let's figure this out. Let's see if there's any patterns, and let's figure out how we're going to make it through. But somehow, despite all of these positive impacts to performance, I never quite seemed to fit in. I never quite seemed to be doing it good enough. And I always found myself sort of contorting to what was deemed the standard of leadership, what has been deemed the standard of professionalism. And in that process of trying to contort myself to the norm, I lost myself. Because I was continuously given feedback in my performance appraisals that wanted me to conform to this norm. And quite frankly, something that I was actually never going to be able to do. Because what I quickly found out was that the identity that was being normalized was that of a white, hetero, cis, able-bodied male. And actually, when I try to embody some of those identities and characteristics, it wasn't deemed good enough either. And in fact, many times I was punished for being short, for being decisive, for being non-collaborative, for being aggressive. And so, quite frankly, it was a no-win situation. And so, what I began to do and take on was a very deep journey of self-reflection, of awareness, with a lot of therapy, a lot of support, a lot of retreats, and quite frankly, the incredible, incredible support of my community. And what I found myself at was recognizing the gems that lied within the complexity and the tapestry of all of my identities. And those identities gave me core elements of integrity, of valuing mutualism, as well as love.
Hi, all. I'm Kelly Croce-Sorg, and I'm white. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm the co-founder with Aurora of the Opt-in, and I invite white folks into opt in to uncomfortable conversations about race to evolve our culture. So my upbringing prepared me more than anything else, not only to conform to the system, but to be the best at it. I was raised by my parents, a mom who stayed home, and a dad who still, to this day, everyone considers this quintessential rags to riches story. For those of you from Philly, my dad's Pat Croce. Scrappy white kid from North Philly, turned successful entrepreneur, turned NBA owner. He was a super charismatic leader, ruggedly individual. And my parents always valued transformation, and it came in the forms of physical fitness and wellness and self-betterment. And I was raised in this culture of competitiveness and always striving to be number one, Kaizen. My dad was remarkable, figuring out how this culture worked and how to do it better than anybody else. Raising my brother and I the same. And all of the systems worked in our favor for this to happen. See, that guy made it. The system works. So my advantaged social identities of being wealthy and white and able-bodied and cisgendered, heterosexual, they allowed me this ease of advantage to attend private school. I went to Penn State for college, worked in entrepreneurial businesses, stayed home to raise my kids. And I was conditioned, get ahead, get ahead, get ahead, and value everyone the same. We're all equal. And that just doesn't really jive. I was actually used to being treated unequally, as my social identities are advantaged more than a lot of other social identities. So I lived in this security and advantage of my dad's success most of my life until I met Aurora. And I was friends with Aurora for 10 years. We got close probably, it's now 4 years ago, when she gifted me a book. And it was this major wake-up call to my own self-centered behaviors and shallow level of intimacy and awareness. Frankly, she was fed up. She had no fear of open conflict, though. She knew if she gave me this book that it could be this kind of come to Jesus moment if I actually read it. And I did. And it was one of those matrix moments. It was like where everything I thought was not what it was. The things I knew to be true were very questionable. And her experiences were way different than mine. And the same rules did not apply. It got to the point where I couldn't believe Aurora actually wanted to be friends with me. And so I began to understand that there's this high probability that my dad's rags to riches story would not have happened if he was Black. In fact, he could possibly be in prison today for getting into fights as a young man. And I began to envision all the disadvantages we would have had. I started to see that Aurora and I were living in two very different worlds. And they were having to do with my advantaged social identities. Something she had always known, mind you. I thought I was a good person. And I aspired to be a good person. And yet here I was, a really shitty friend. And Aurora was willing to wait for me while I developed my racial awareness and became more culturally competent. I was like voraciously unlearning whitewashed history, trying to become more racially literate, healing myself in the process with some deep self-work and desegregating my environment of just a totally white bubble that I was in. I even thought back to one of these women's studies classes I took at Penn State called Women of Color. And I was learning about Peggy McIntosh's invisible backpack of privilege. It was like an hour and a half of learning in a multicultural classroom out of the hundreds of hours of classes with all white faces. And I now see how my racial identity is crucial for my maturity, but at the time it was utterly foreign to me. I thought back to this African dance class I had signed up for, and I thought I was excited to take, and then quickly late dropped it because my white fragility flared and I was majorly uncomfortable. So there was times in doing this work that I felt terrible. I was contributing to this delusion of a hierarchy of human value. And I grieved the loss of who I thought I was and who I thought our country was. And yet Aurora could hold both of those things to be true. That was some plasticity my brain didn't quite have yet. And she actually still loved me through all of these ugly parts of me. And so if she could still love me through that, then I owed it to myself to love me through it. and do better. And what I learned from Aurora, amongst millions of things, we would be here all day, is that I'm programmed to not see my whiteness. So I was unconscious to it. And if I didn't become aware of it, I'd still be telling the same disadvantaged rags to riches story. My dad's disadvantaged class or my disadvantaged gender, being female, would still be the marker for who I am. And it would be false. It would be incomplete. Because I'm the one with the advantage. I have the ease and access to work at changing it all. Mm-hmm. I'm responsible. So I can use my advantages for the greater good, because we accumulate this privilege all the time. It keeps filling up. It's like a bank account, and I need to spend it. So I wasn't aware of my advantage identities. And I kind of looked at myself and like projected into the future. Like, if I didn't become aware of them, like, what would the ghost of Christmas future be telling me? Mm. And I really think that I was going to squander a life of comfort and never really having stepped into my authentic self and lived a real human life. So Aurora's friendship has changed my life. I've been on a journey of self-transformation. Believe me, if I learn this, anybody can learn it. If we all learn it, we could change everything, because we're in charge of everything. We're disproportionately running all of these systems. And if we could become more conscious of our harm and impact and be using our privilege to dismantle racism and the systems that perpetuate it, we'd be on a good track. So Aurora and I set on this path. We created the opt-in to create ways for people to opt into racial awareness and culture change.
And so Kelly and I have shared our social stories. We have shared how our social identities have played a huge part, an impact in our lives, and how we have experienced our lives, and how in many instances, as Kelly said, we are living two different lives. We are experiencing two different lives because of our identities. And we know that social identities are transformational, our awareness to them. And so as you all sit as leaders of transformation, as leaders of change, as it relates to talent, to people, to recruitment, to the creation of what we all are prioritizing, which is the creation of environments, professionally as well as personally, that are diverse. That means everyone is included, that are inclusive, which means that we see, hear, and value all identities, and that are underpinned by equity. And so we believe that an awareness of our social identity sits at the center of us creating this transformation, not only within ourselves, but within our environments. Because what's clear is that what we've been doing thus far actually hasn't been working. And so as we unpack social identity, what we believe is that it supports the creation of uplifting, of propelling, and enhancing cultural competence that we define as the ongoing development of self-awareness, literacy, connection, and stamina, so that we can understand and effectively relate to people across all social identities and take action to support equity for all.
So what's getting in the way of that? We were just saying, really valuing all identities equally. And why aren't we valuing all identities equally, you ask? But I first want to get clear on identities, on personal identities to start, yes, and then move into social identities. So when I say personal identities, these are the ones we're in control of. We're at a dinner and someone asks, tell me about yourself. These are the things you're going to talk about: your skills, your career, your life experiences. Aurora mentioned that she's charismatic, a personality trait. I mentioned I went to Penn State, love to go to Penn State football games, etc. So they're categories that we create, and they make sense to us anyway. Now, social identities, they're a little different because we're not in charge of creating them. They're society defined. They're a fixed set of categories. They're important for how I'm viewed by other people, and they're critical for understanding actually how society works. I'm saying this to you, I just learned this, okay? And the most important part about them is they come with advantages and disadvantages. Like there's just bonuses and minuses to all of them. So you're familiar with these. These are like the most famous 9, right? Gender, sexuality, age, no particular order, ethnicity, race, class, citizenship, religion, etc. For example, so these are my social identities. I have one disadvantaged social identity in being female. I'm cisgender, meaning I associate with the gender I was born as. Heterosexual, I'm able-bodied, I'm neurotypical, I'm Christian, grew up Catholic, etc. My family's European American. They came from Italy and Ireland. I'm middle-aged. I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm white, and I grew up upper class in my socioeconomic status. So, for example, my whole life, I was taught this story of, as Croces, how we persevered, how hard it was. And we told the stories of my family's disadvantage and our lack of socioeconomic status and how we got here today. And so to give you an example, my grandfather was orphaned as a child. He enlisted in the Navy. After he served in the Korean War, he bought a row home in North Philadelphia. Now, he was resilient. Life was not easy. His social identity of whiteness was not oppressed by the redlining of the city, though. He had that advantage to use that home as collateral and buy a home in Levittown, PA, outside of the city limits. Now, I only found this out recently through a Black friend, that it was written into Levittown's FHA laws to prohibit Black families from buying homes there. Later, that advantage of having home collateral, he was able to buy a home in Lansdowne, which is the house I remember visiting as a kid before my grandparents sold it in retirement. As they said, the Blacks were moving in. So the social identity of whiteness allowed me and my family to own land and build wealth, and ultimately lend my dad $5,000 to start his physical therapy business. And it began my family's generational wealth. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about social identities carrying advantages and disadvantages. And all these elements work together to advantage my grandfather, my dad, me, and my family. And it wasn't that my grandfather and my dad didn't have some adversity. They needed resilience, etc. However, their disadvantages were highly tempered by their advantages of being white and male and hetero and cisgendered and able-bodied, and allowed them to excel in a world that was designed for people who looked like them. Growing up, we never talked about our whiteness. We never addressed it. We never acknowledged its presence or its power. I was unaware of it. I was unaware of the most influential social identity. Now, I said it, the one identity that determines our outcomes in life above all else, the most influential is race. Of those advantaged identities, white is the most advantaged. How do we know that? Because there's outcomes in life that show us, we can go through stats and stats and stats of that, and there's a social construct that upholds it. So this made up thing of race is actually having all of this impact. And it took me till I was almost 40 to understand the one thing that determined most of my life. So we can just sit with that, because even in talking about race, for as long as I have been now, it's still uncomfortable. As a white person, being the most advantaged by it. So if we're talking about achieving true diversity, equity, and inclusion. That would mean we would need to value all identities. Now, I might not have been aware of my whiteness, but Aurora was very aware. And I was socialized to not know about it. And it was the most influential, most advantaged. And so our goal here in DEI is to have everyone's identities equally valued. But how can we do that if there's one that's advantaged and we don't know about it? How can we lead a group where everyone's valued equally when we know the white race is advantaged and yet we don't know about it? It's the identity we know the least about. So we believe this is why we keep trying to solve for something and having failing results. And of all the cultural competencies, the one we need to start with is racial self-awareness. To understand how our self and society works. And examining our racial social identity requires racial self-awareness. Awareness is critical to creating a diverse, equitable, inclusive environment and team. I spent so much time learning about Aurora and her experience, and meanwhile I had no idea about mine. How can I fully understand her experience if I don't know my own? Mm-hmm. It's like if I was studying somebody else's religion, never having known my own or my own spirituality. And we're socialized to be that way.
Happens all the time.
Mm-hmm. We want to talk about attraction and retention. Well, I've learned Black people don't want to work with white people who aren't aware of their whiteness. Mm-hmm. When I'm a woman, I don't want to work with men who aren't aware of their advantage of maleness. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Muslim people would want to work with Christians who understand how their Christianness advantages them. I mean, it's understanding how ourselves and society works. Yeah. And so for us, this is how we found it to be true. That people develop cultural competency and racial self-awareness by utilizing our own self-awareness and applying it to racial literacy, connection, and stamina. And it seems so selfish to start with ourselves, right? Don't center whiteness. Well, we've done everything but center whiteness in a lot of ways. It's kind of counterintuitive.
And we would offer it's a focus and not a centering.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. And so racial self-awareness is essential to cultural competency, and it's achieved by strengthening these elements. So self-awareness, right? It's this capacity of consciousness to reflect on our thoughts and feelings, to kind of understand how we might be perceived by other people, how we're perceiving ourselves. I mean, I found that it was through a lot of humility and feeling my feelings and taking responsibility of the energy I was bringing into a room, looking around a room, seeing who was there, who wasn't there, as just some examples of some self-awareness practice. Racial literacy, who we credit Dr. Franz Wyndens Twine, consists of understanding race as this social construct that we mentioned, the history and current system of racism, of whiteness as a dominant culture, intersectionality, that compounding of identities of Mexican, Black, female, etc., and the language and ability to talk about race. Yeah. So after my Matrix moment, I began and never stopped reading. And we have a bookshop too at the Optin, and I still attend retreats and webinars and community of practice and seed groups. It's amazing work. And it's been done for hundreds of years prior to us.
And it's a journey.
Because
the learning never stops.
That's right. And for connection, so I was in this very white bubble, and it was moving from this disconnected space into a more, interpersonal worldview space. So for me, it's I can read all the books and do all of the learning, but if I stay in my white bubble, nothing changes. Mm-hmm. And so am I intentionally observing and listening, how I can be of service in this moment? Maybe this is the time I don't talk. It's her turn. Maybe I'm in with all white people and this is the time I speak up. Mm-hmm. Am I thanking and amplifying the BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color voices who've done this work for decades and even centuries? Because I know I learned by reading the one book written by the white woman, but it opened the door to a lot of other learning that I maybe would not have seen for another period of time. Am I paying and investigating ways to redistribute funds to Black, Indigenous, people of color owned companies, products, services, investments? And am I nurturing friendships with people who may not look like me? And finally, there's stamina. And this is my favorite. It's continuously opting in, right? So what's our motivation? What's our hope? What's our habits and structures that we do every day? And most importantly, where is our community? Like, this is the opt-in. It's not a checklist. It's a journey. And it's this practice of racial self-awareness and cultural competencies. And community is the glue and the goal. I mean, no one wants to get on the dance floor by themselves, let alone stay on it by themselves. I mean, when we're together,
you do a good job of it, though.
I mean, sometimes I do want to be on by myself. I'm not going to lie. I do like the spotlight once in a while. I'm just kidding. But when we are together, what seems really hard and in opposition to our own conditioning can be a loving and accountable journey. And you all are leading the way. It starts with you.
It absolutely does. You know, as Kelly and I shared our journeys, one of the other very critical and common threads is that we each chose to step into that courageous well of unpacking, of examining, of being curious and looking into who are we? What has defined us? What are the belief systems that either consciously or unconsciously we've adopted? What are the ways in which we take those beliefs and traverse our lives and experience and interact with others, whether it's in our families, whether it's in our workplace, whether it's in our communities? And so we ask that of you. What steps are you taking to first and foremost begin with an introspection and a self-awareness of yourself? Because what we do know is that many programs and many initiatives and many efforts that have started at the group level, and we're not saying that that's not ultimately where we have to get to, because Lord knows that I sat in many, many group sessions in corporate America for unbiased training and DE&I and
just what you
sessions.
needed, right? Like, you needed that.
Yeah. And it was so amazing because I share with Kelly, I always got the sense that my white colleagues believed that they were there because of me. And so when in fact, there was an incredible opportunity for my white colleagues to take that lens or that learning and that mirror and look at themselves. And so today, our offering, our urging, our opting in is that it starts with you. And as leaders of transformation, as leaders of talent, as leaders of people, your ability to introspect yourself, to begin that transformation in self, to then shift the mindset that is required for you to behave, experience, drive choices, drive policy, drive action that will impact your home, that will impact your work environment, and that will impact our society at large, first and foremost will begin with you. And so
we often get asked, when we get done talking, people are like, well, where do I start? What next steps can I take? And so we wanted to just make some offerings that kind of fall into a lot of the tenets we just talked about. And really, it's to just stop and take a breath and get still and really look around in your life and just start to notice and feel all those feels of what comes up. We say triggers are treasures. And I'm sure we took that from somebody that I can't think of right now whose quote that is, but it is. There's a treasure trove of triggers.
And so we began our session by taking a deep breath, which is exactly connected to the first bullet point. Our ability to notice begins with our ability to get still.
Yeah.
And to be present to the moment of what is happening around us. And most importantly, to be present to what is happening within us.
Yep. Because in the building of stamina and opting in again and again, there's times where we make mistakes and it's easy to opt out and to go back to sleep. And that's where we encourage that, just opt in again and again. And we see everyone making their efforts and leaning towards a common goal. We talked a little bit about connection, but notice the homogeneity of your life. Look at your Facebook friends. Are they all white? I mean, where you live, we in Philly, it's a very segregated area. It's the way the lines were drawn. And so a lot of this will take intentionality.
Yes.
And awareness and intention. It won't just come in stride. It won't come to you. You will seek it out.
And I think as leaders in professional environments, some of the most diverse places, albeit most diverse places, that we get an opportunity to spend our time is actually in our workspaces. And so the ability to get out of our comfort zones and, as Kelly mentioned before, see who's in the room, see who's not in the room, and how do you start building those connections, and building those connections not from the point of view of how you view that connection, but from the point of view of the Black, Indigenous person of color. And so do you want to talk about emotions?
Oh, yeah. I did touch on it, but a lot of emotions that came up for me were not always comfortable ones or ones that I wanted to address. And so in order to not address them, I would defend them. And so for a long time, I defended them by just denying that anything uncomfortable actually even happened. And then when my friend here and I were on a journey together, I was able to then witness those emotions and then see I kind of would manipulate them in other ways. Like I would get really, I would try to save her, or I would get really intellectual and just double down on the learning. Instead of being more open and loving and accepting to myself, looking at my shame, shining a light on it, understanding that we all have it.
Yeah.
We all have shame. I would say our country's fueled by it. And that there's so much learning in those uncomfortable emotions. So much learning. So much still comes up. And then becoming more racially literate is a constant practice. So we would encourage you to find a learning program, find community.
We happen to offer one.
Yes. We also have a podcast of lots of learnings. I can't recommend enough the 14-part podcast series, Seeing White by Seen on Radio. Should be like mandatory American listening. There's so many books. We have them in our bookshop. Read, listen, however you like to learn. Start following and desegregating your feed if you haven't already online. So, make sure you're following people that don't look like you, that are making you aware of things that maybe you weren't aware of before. When and if you start following us, we can direct you to so many people, so many Black, Indigenous people of color in this work whose voices we're amplifying.
And it's just becoming aware and connected to voices, to opinions, to points of view, to people that are not in your typical environment. And as Kelly said, whether that's your social feed, whether it's the books that you have on your bookshelf, whether it's the movies in your, streaming movie queue of Netflix or Hulu or whatever it is, like make sure that you're opening and widening the aperture of what you are taking in and what perspectives you are encouraging yourself to step into. And so with that, we thank you for this time. We've left some ample time for questions. We so hope that you drop some in. We're going to transfer in a few seconds over to Maria so that she can begin sharing the questions that you all have dropped into the chat box. And but before we do that, we'd like to share with you how you can find us.
Yeah, please. We'd love to hear from you any way possible and get in conversation. So please join us. Our website is theopt-in.com, and you can follow us on all the socials there. We're very present, especially on Instagram and LinkedIn. You can listen to our podcast from our website and from all the top podcast platforms. Mm-hmm. Please subscribe. You can join our newsletter, which is a great window into our community.
And for organizations, we love helping organizations unpack this incredible and much needed work in creating diverse, inclusive, and equitable cultures and workspaces and environments. We'd love to hear. We'd love to see if it makes sense for us to partner. You can find us at theoptin.com/culture.
Yes, everything from speaking workshops,
facilitation, to an actual comprehensive and integrated learning curriculum program. And so with that, Maria,
thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Hi, Maria.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much. Kelly and Aurora, it was amazing. Thank you both for being so open about your journeys and for all of the great insights that you provided. I think what I love about hearing from both of you is the second time I've heard your stories is how there's such different experiences can come together and can move forward and help to, lead us through some progress. So we did have some really great questions. The first, I think, is really important when you're thinking about opting in and when you're talking about speaking up and listening is that fear that a lot of employees have that they're going to say the wrong thing or I'm going to offend somebody. Can I really be that open? Can I really listen? So what are some tactics or some things that we could do to make sure that we encourage people to just be open and be okay with saying what you want to say and not worrying about offending anyone?
Yes. So I will share a couple of things. I think first and foremost, what I want to offer is that you are going to make a mistake. In the learning process and the innovation process and the process of growing, none of us go from womb to crawling to walking to running without stumbling, without making a mistake, without sticking our foot way in it. And so what I would love to offer and share and take the pressure off, it's like, guess what? You're gonna make a mistake. You're gonna stumble. And it's not gonna feel great. And in the process, there may be some damage, but first and foremost, it's always about stepping back up, owning it, and taking accountability for it. So that's first and foremost. I just want to take the pressure off, like nobody's going to get this perfect. It's just quite impossible. So recognize and know that mistakes will happen. But take accountability for the mistake, own it, and repair accordingly. The second thing I would like to offer is that in most of our organizations, we live by a set of values, right? And depending on what those values are for your organization, I'm going to assume that somewhere there's probably values that are connected to people being valued. There's probably a value connected to creativity or innovation, of changing and growing. And so anchoring yourself on the fact that as a company value, me showing up as my authentic self is what we say we value. And this is where the pressure is also coming in for organizations, that the walking of the talk of the values. But If authenticity, for example, is one of your values, then that means that you are creating a space and an environment where people can ask questions, where people can bring things up, where people can speak up. And so that's number one. And then the second thing that I would offer within the context of your values and living your values is, what does the situation call for? Does the situation call for that I bring this up in this moment in a room with 200 people? And am I sitting in a place where I am grounded in myself and I can speak up or share this from a place of being whole and clear? Does the situation call for me to bring this up at a later point with someone one-on-one? And so I think it's being able to situationally understand what is most needed that keeps you whole and keeps the audience whole in that moment, and then move accordingly. And what I would offer is that staying silent or not moving or not taking an action is actually not the option, because we know how to do this. We know how to do this in many, many other aspects of our lives. Anything that you would add, Kelly?
That was wonderful. I was going to say that it's just a couple tricks for me is to speak from I. Speak from I, and people end up receiving what I'm saying easier. When I come at you, your defense goes up. But if I speak from I, it'll let you take what I'm saying in and say, which part of this fits, what doesn't, what's alignment with me, what's not, and kind of sift through it from there. So that was the only thing I was going to add to that awesome answer.
Thank you. That was perfect. I think it's that, just like being okay with accepting that you're going to make a mistake, kind of pull the Band-Aid, right, and just go on. And I love that, talking from the I as opposed to the you. So this is something that actually came up. I think this question came up after one of the tactics that you said that we should do about following people who are different than you. But some of us have very homogeneous networks, right? So how do we make sure that we're spending time with people that aren't like us without tokenizing those people in our lives to kind of play a part, but to really kind of broaden for everybody? So what are some ideas that you guys have?
Great. Actually, I'm going to just turn the sound down so it doesn't kick back. Well, it's opt-in. So if you could think of OPTIN. So O is observe. That's like, feel it out. And let me just watch. I don't have to talk about who I'm watching or whatever, or, that's kind of the tokenizing part, is when I'm kind of saying what I'm doing. I can just observe a lot. If I like rock climbing, I can look into Black Indigenous people of color who rock climb. I mean, there's just so many ways to observe other people that don't look like me. P is pay. So we're paying, it started with money, it's going to end with money. We want to make sure that we're investing in people that are doing things that don't look like us. So whenever I'm learning from a teacher, even if I'm watching an IG Live, I'll send them money via their Venmo or whatever it is. Like, if I'm learning from them, I'm going to pay them. And money talks, it goes a long way. It feels kind of tokeny at first, but people appreciate it. People really appreciate it. I appreciate being paid. Everyone appreciates being paid. T is thank. So make sure you are crediting, thanking, giving props to whomever you're learning from. Naming who's out there so that more people can learn. I is investigate. So if I'm getting my dog groomed, I'm investigating. Where is there a Black Indigenous person of color that's grooming dogs? And I found one.
Yeah. But it's in everything, right?
Everything.
Think about
where am I investing? Who's my banker? Who's my accountant?
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that most people forget. It's like, you're choosing right now, but you're actually probably choosing based on the homogeneity of what's around you. And so when you investigate, yeah, it may take a few minutes, but it's like, oh, I'm going to buy a pair of sneakers for my kids. Okay, let me go investigate who might be what might be a Black Indigenous person of color that makes sneakers. We did our holiday gift cards, right? Kelly found a phenomenal
by Miss James, artist, did awesome cards.
And so as we bring these amazing creatives and artists and businesses into our lives, we are actually not only we're creating connection, we're building relationship, and we are expanding our point of view.
And lastly, it's N, nurture. And that's nurturing friendships. As a white woman, I had really transactional friendships in a lot of ways. There's some friendships that I've had for my entire life, and then sometimes things were just transactional. So it's really nurturing friendships where I had to be a better person in order to be a better friend. Where I had to really tap into my own humanity. I couldn't even tell you what the word humanity meant 3 years ago. I mean, really. So I would just say nurturing friendships. That takes time. And it takes just a level of honesty and authenticity too. I mean, you're not going to fake that till you make it. So I would just say that the word nurture, it just takes time and energy, right?
And I'm also going to offer, last but not least, is on the optin.com, we have resources. And so if you're saying, oh, I've got my son's birthday coming up and I'd love to order a cake, go on to the optin.com resources. We have curated a list of different Black Indigenous people of color who are doing amazing things, and get connected.
I love that. Thank you. It's such real life things that you can do where it's not, I think this is where we had talked about before, it's like, it's not just at work, it's at home. Do it at home and in your personal life, and then it'll extend out. So great things. I love the tie into opt-in too. So there are a lot of individuals that we know who haven't joined the conversation at all. So how do we really get these individuals who believe in it and want to participate, but just to kind of get them off the fence and into the conversation about race and identity and their self-awareness? So
that is the money question, Maria.
So you want to talk about pre-contemplation?
Oh, yeah. And then I can close with what I was thinking of too. So in the theory of change, right, there's pre-contemplation, we don't know there's a problem. There's contemplation, we know there's a problem, we're thinking about it. There's preparation, I know there's a problem, I'm going to do something about it. There's action, I'm doing something about the problem. There's maintenance, I keep doing something about the problem. And there's relapse. Oops, I forgot about the problem. I got to get back into contemplation and proceed. So the people who may not be receptive to what we're talking about quite often are in pre-contemplation. They do not have the tools and skills or awareness at that time to understand what we're talking about at that time. They have the tools within them. We can trust that. We can keep space for that. They're not in contemplation yet, and that's okay. They may get there in this life. They may not. I would say that nobody wants to join a lame dance party. Like, we have got to infuse joy and accountability and love into what we do if anybody is going to be attracted to it. So in a program I'm in, it's attraction, not promotion, for some of you who know what I'm talking about. If it looks like we're having a great time, it's because we are. And I think it's only going to take a small amount of us to kind of make that tipping point. And we need to make sure that we're tapped into our motivation, because that is personal. I couldn't do this for her or her kids. I had to be able to do it for myself. I have to be motivated internally. And to be honest, some of the greatest motivation is pain. I didn't want to feel like a shitty friend anymore. I don't want to be, some people don't want to be uncomfortable in conversations about race anymore. Sometimes people don't want to, think that they're comfortable, and yet we're like really kind of addicted and disconnected. And we're craving this level of connection and we don't even know it. That's uncomfortable. So part of this is attraction, part of it's motivation.
Yes.
And part of it is acceptance. They're in pre-contemplation, and that's okay.
And I would offer, going to the question, which is, what do you do? I think in our work environments, we have to ask ourselves and be very honest about what is our motivation. What is our organizational motivation for this change? And then asking our team members to say, and what about that motivation actually is personal? What part of this is the reason why you would want to do this, right? And it could be as simple as like, I don't really understand this and I want to understand more. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah.
That could be the starting point of the motivation. When race comes up, I become uncomfortable. And I don't like that feeling because it makes me feel dumb. It makes me feel like I'm not an expert, and I'm high performing and I'm an expert in other things in my life. Other things may be, you know what? We just moved into a new neighborhood and it's a lot more diverse than my old one and I don't actually know how to navigate it. Or my boss has tasked me with creating a more diverse and inclusive team and I don't even know where to start. It could be like, I don't even understand the language, the lexicon around race. So it's...
I mean, we probably used annoyingly big words that I probably wouldn't have known not very long ago. And so it's sometimes just getting a familiarity where you're like, oh, that's what we're talking about. Okay.
And so it's like, find the motivation and find that motivation at the organizational level, at the team level, but always being able to bring it down to the individual level. Because if we're not individually motivated, this work is going to continue to be harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, or it's performative, meaning totally fake and about to stop in about 6 months, maybe 6 weeks.
Yep. So this is our last question, and you teed me up really well, so thank you. So taking it back to the business world. So how do we as HR professionals encourage our business leaders to just scratch the surface on their D&I programs, to really take them to the next level, to get this open and engage in these types of conversations? So what are some things that we can take back to our companies?
So I think first and foremost, it goes back to, what does your company value? And how does DE&I sit within the construct of you and your organization living your values? That's first and foremost. And I'm going to start there with values because I'm going to assume that the quantitative data around building diverse, inclusive, and equity organizations, the data's out. The metrics are already out with regards to the impact to performance, the impact to growth, the impact to creating, retaining talent, the impact to being able to recruit the emerging set of talent that is coming through from millennials and Gen Z. There is just zero tolerance for environments that don't have a lens, a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. Values and data.
Yeah, and the speed and the next.
And the evolution of what leadership is going to require of us, because what we believe is that the skills that we build for DE&I are literally an intrinsic match to the future-proof leadership skills that most organizations are needing. Empathetic leaders, leaders who know how to manage conflict, leaders who know how to navigate ambiguity and complexity, are curious. Those are all skills that are built and created through leading DE&I efforts and change and learning.
So Kelly and Aurora, I want to thank you both so much. This presentation has been so thought-provoking and so insightful, and the content you provided is so critical in us trying to continue to move forward and progress toward change. So thank you both so much again for being a part of the symposium.
It was our pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maria.
Have a great rest of your day.
You too. And thank you to our sponsor, Exude. We encourage you to head over to Remo for more networking. At 2:15, we will have our next Smart Stage presentation from sponsor Puzzle Break on how to build relationships in a remote workplace. After the presentation, feel free to continue to network, visit with our exhibitors and sponsors. Our closing session with James Robalata will begin at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. See you then.